Hello, and welcome to another episode of Enchanting Economics in New Mexico. This podcast is a production of BBER, the recognized expert in socioeconomic data for the state of New Mexico. Your hosts, as usual, are myself, Rayanne McKernan, alongside Sarun Lytle. Also joining us from BBER today is our data bank manager, Suzan Reagan. And our special guest today is Sonja Unrau. She's the communications manager for the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority. Sonja, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start off with a brief overview of what MFA is and what its mission is. The MFA office is located here in Albuquerque, right? But you serve the entire state?
That's correct. The New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority is a self-supporting quasi-governmental entity that provides financing for housing services and programs, specifically targeted to low and moderate New Mexicans across the housing spectrum. We deal in programs including emergency shelters and transitional housing for homeless individuals and persons fleeing domestic violence, permanent supportive housing for individuals that are at risk of homelessness and also have serious mental illness diagnoses, rental assistance, housing development to increase housing stock, primarily rental development at this point, also home loans and down payment assistance, and homeowner rehab and weatherization projects. MFA, we partner with lenders, realtors, nonprofits, local governments, tribal communities, and developers throughout the state to deliver these programs. So we largely operate as an administrative organization. And it's MFA's vision that all New Mexicans will have quality, affordable housing opportunities. And it's our mission to be the leader in affordable housing. We provide innovative products, education, and services to strengthen families and communities.
So BBER annually has been conducting this apartment survey for MFA in New Mexico, excluding Albuquerque and Santa Fe, for over a decade now, right, Suzan?
Yes, I think our first one was in 2009, and we're currently doing the 2021 apartment survey. It has been out to apartments to fill in for March of this year.
Okay. So, Sonja, what other sources of data or information does MFA use to help determine areas in need of assistance?
Yeah, well, first, the BBER survey is particularly important because Suzan and her team collect data on vacancy rates and rent prices, which are two key indicators of housing market demand. Low vacancy rates and high rent suggest high demand for rental housing, which we see that is particularly acute in areas like Santa Fe and Taos and even Albuquerque and Doña Ana County. BBER doesn't survey Santa Fe and Albuquerque because the CBRE group, Coldwell Bankers Richard Ellis, a commercial real estate firm, publishes similar data on these two cities. So we don't like to duplicate effort. Another key data source, probably our second most important data source, which Suzan also helps us compile, is indicators from the American Community Survey, which provides us data including housing tenure, such as the number and percentage of renters versus homeowners, housing stock composition, housing condition issues like whether homes have complete plumbing or complete kitchens, and cost burden. And I'll say cost burden is one of the biggest metrics we use to track the need for housing programs. And cost burden refers to when a household pays 30% or more of gross income towards housing costs. We also get market data from the New Mexico Association of Realtors, and CoreLogic also supplies us data on variables such as delinquencies and foreclosures. And since spring of last year, on a weekly basis, the Census Bureau has published data that measures household experiences during the coronavirus pandemic, such as the ability to make housing payments, employment status, reliance on other financial sources like credit cards or savings, disaggregated by certain characteristics such as geography, race, and ethnicity. And with Suzan's help, we're continuing to develop new data sources and to understand for more nuanced pictures of housing needs and markets in New Mexico.
All right. Well, I do want to come back to COVID in a minute, but I do want to ask, since BBER doesn't help you gather information on Albuquerque and Santa Fe housing, you do still touch those cities, like you said, with the help of CBRE. Do you assess the largely populated areas the same way that you aim to help the rural or the rest of New Mexico?
Yeah, certainly. So MFA's programs and services are offered statewide, and because the largest percentage of New Mexico's households do reside in the larger cities, Albuquerque, Las Cruces, Santa Fe, Farmington, Gallup, most of our work is in fact done in those areas. We have a lot of programs in cities where the extraction industry is located, like HOTS, largely due to exceptional growth and economic development and populations. And it's kind of a continuous priority of MFA to ensure equitable administration of programs and services and focus on specific regional needs. In more rural areas of state that are more sparsely populated, we don't always rarely do we build large apartment complexes because the local economy can't really support that demand. In these cases, we work closely with local leaders to assess the investments that make sense, and sometimes that's just smaller developments or focusing on rehabilitating existing housing stock.
Okay. So you're not cookie cutter. You actually take the time to really look at the area that you're focused on in the moment.
That's true. And I'll say one challenge that we're continuing to work to resolve is because we rely on service providers like nonprofits, in a few cases, local governments to actually do the on-the-ground work. We are always looking to expand those partnerships where there might be gaps because we don't actually touch clients. We largely work in program design and development. So we basically establish the rules or pass down the rules from HUD and rely on these partner agencies. And so when we're talking about geographic coverage, it's kind of largely contingent on where we have service providers. So we're always trying to look to expand that network and empower those service providers to be able to get funding out and reach people in need.
And people in need takes us right back to COVID. How has this pandemic affected your efforts? And has there been any added pressure or greater strains on you guys or your programs?
The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly made the challenge of housing security even more acute for low and moderate income households. These households and family are more likely to be employed in sectors hit hardest by mitigation measures, such as the shutdown rules. These people tend to work in service or retail and have had and suffered high rates of financial hardships. And various data sources, including the Housing Pulse survey, which I mentioned earlier, shows that these families have been forced to make tough spending decisions like using credit cards or loans to pay bills or cut back on food and medical care spending. So in the fall of 2020, MFA quickly developed a program with $13 million in community development block grant funds, which came to us for the state of New Mexico, to respond to the needs of these families, including a housing cost assistance program, which provided up to 3 months of rent or mortgage payment to low and moderate income households throughout the state that have been impacted by COVID. And this was actually the first time, to my knowledge, that MFA had actually delivered direct services. So we built this program, hired staff to intake applicants, review their qualification and eligibility, and get funding out. And then recently, under the American Recovery Plan, the most recent stimulus package, $160 million in funding for rent relief was passed, and the state is administering this money. So MFA has transitioned its priorities to assisting low-income homeowners. Policies like eviction and foreclosure prevention have been important in keeping people housed. However, arrears continue to accrue. Financial assistance to renters and homeowners is not only important to the individual household, keeping a roof over their head, and also combating the spread of COVID, but also ensuring landlords and property managers stay afloat so that they have the liquidity to maintain their properties, and it ensures that these rental housing units remain on the rental market, and homes are not, once these foreclosure moratoriums expire, they're not there's not this sudden wave, or at least we're mitigating a wave of foreclosures.
And with like the craziness of the housing market right now, are you guys seeing an increase in people needing rental housing or not really?
Yeah, it's really interesting because rental housing development that's not subsidized primarily focuses on high-end apartment complexes for higher income earners. There's actually been a growth in the median income of renters, and that's really largely due to increases in the number of high income earners, not low income renters experiencing wage or earnings growth. So the demand persists for these low income units, even though building and rental units in general is on the up. The market rate properties tend to focus on housing for wealthier households. As far as home ownership, interest rates are low and there's plenty of qualified buyers, even low-income qualified buyers. However, housing stock is so low. I don't have the exact figure, but the absorption rate, which is basically how long a housing unit remains on the market before it's purchased or rented, is exceptionally low in New Mexico. I think sometimes I think the healthy number or amount of months you'd want a housing stock is about 4 months. And I think in Albuquerque, we have about 2 weeks of housing stock. And it's quite the challenge. Homeownership is really the key way American families build wealth. It's a key way people can escape poverty because it's a stable investment, and we just have such a limited supply that it's going to continue to put pressure on the rental market and the home ownership market. So housing development is key, both rental and single family.
And what is up with OSB and lumber prices these days? The price of roof is through the roof. I just read that in an article.
It's true. I just had a roof replacement, so I can personally attest to that. Suzan might actually be able to speak better than I, but I'll say the cost of construction, from labor shortage to supplies, makes development difficult. And that's largely why development focuses on these high income earners rather than moderate, smaller units affordable to MFA's target population. And maybe Suzan can speak to the supply, the construction issue a little better than I.
Well, I think I could talk a little bit about it. Certainly the cost of goods, the cost of raw lumber has been increasing tremendously. And some of that is supply. The supply of lumber is short, so the cost goes up. But also, talking about construction labor, coming out of the Great Recession, construction had to kind of make itself in the new, and so it became a very mobile labor force. And I think a lot of people got out of construction and did not come back into construction. And so certainly construction has the need for young people to step into construction jobs and take them up. And so they're fighting two things, and that's increasing the costs that it takes for people to build a house. So a developer tries to go in and they're having a hard time finding the right labor, and they have to pay premium price for the labor they get. And then on top of that, the cost of lumber has gone up and other raw goods. And so the actual cost of development is up. And in many cases, developers will tell you they can't really afford to just build a 1 or a 2 bedroom house. They really have to build a 3 or a 4 bedroom house where they can recover the cost of what it takes to build. So they actually have to build a more expensive house, bigger and with more rooms, because the cost of labor and the cost of raw goods are so high for them to recover costs and make a living on it. And so certainly we're seeing that there's this sort of push. We need houses, we need more houses, but we need more affordable houses. But the construction industry, the developers in there, really can't afford to build small, affordable houses. And so they are really actually kind of aiming at a higher market. And it just kind of is a bad cycle right now in the housing industry. And we hope that we'll see some of those things lessen as the pandemic goes away, and I certainly know from the labor side that there are a lot of programs and apprenticeship programs right now trying to attract new labor into the market. So those things are running.
That's really where organizations, MFA is a mortgage finance authority, and there's one in each state, and sometimes they're separated and sometimes they're actually state agencies, and that's really that market segment that isn't being served, the low-income households. That's where MFA and its developer partners aim to serve. Like we provide that unique financing for these single-family homes that otherwise, single-family and multi-family homes that otherwise would not be built.
Have you guys seen anything like this in New Mexico before?
Well, I am from Seattle, where the housing market was crazy, and I never expected in a rural state like New Mexico that seemed very modest population growth and certainly economic development over the years, but nothing like the booming kind of pseudo-tech cities like Seattle and Portland. And I was shocked when I came to New Mexico how competitive the housing market was.
You know, the housing market goes up and down. Certainly we had a lot of population growth in 1980 and 1990. We were one of the fastest growing states. And if you look at construction over time, there was a ton of construction in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And then in about 2015 in New Mexico, we really had that housing bubble hit. And I would say 2019, New Mexico was just recovering from the impacts of the Great Recession. And now we have the pandemic. And I think that those two things in combination have just truly made our housing market as tight as it is.
So, Sonja, what would you say is on the horizon for MFA as we are starting to emerge from this crisis?
The theme, I think, of housing in New Mexico is a shortage of housing, whether it's rental or home ownership. And so MFA is really focused on adding to that housing stock, whether it's building new rental units, building single family units, or improving the quality of existing units so they become up to code and are habitable. We're also increasing our focus on homelessness. That's something that the homeless population in New Mexico has been growing at a rapid rate. I think from 2019 to 2020, we experienced the largest percentage increase in homelessness in the country as far as rate of increase. And so we're looking at ways to incentivize the development of permanent supportive housing, which combines long-term housing with behavioral health services and other services to keep people with a roof over their head. And also looking at ways to increase wealth building opportunities through down payment assistance programs and single family home developments. And there's conversations stirring in the very infancy of ideation about how we can target first generation home buyers. That is, home buyers whose parents never owned a home or haven't recently owned a home within the last 10 or 20 years as a way to actually create intergenerational wealth. Always looking to serve underserved populations, ways we can partner with tribes and rural residents who struggle a little more due to smaller populations, lower incomes, to actually attract development and other services. And because we do rely on a network of partners and service providers and advocates, we're working to always increase the amount of technical assistance we provide so that they have the capacity to really reach everybody in their community that needs services. I would say that's pretty much what's going on.
Yeah. And do you have any advice, or is there anything you think New Mexicans who are looking for housing, whether it's renting or buying, is there anything that they need to know?
Goodness. I think I would say for people, there's a lot of people that may not have a lot of money, but might be close to being qualified for home ownership opportunities and programs than they may think. So reaching out to organizations like MFA and talking about, is there an opportunity for homeowners down payment assistance? Can I get a low interest rate loan? They might be closer to home ownership than they think. They might just need to work a little bit on improving their credit and financial situation. But my sense is just if you have the time and the capacity to reach out to somebody to talk about lending products, there's probably something out there. As far as renters, it's tough. I moved here and tried to find a place to rent, and it was more stressful than trying to rent in Seattle, as I mentioned. So persistence matters. And also, if you're struggling to pay a rent, the state of New Mexico, you can go to renthelp.org, and they have a rental assistance program. And we are soon launching an expanded home ownership assistance program, which will cover people who reside in mobile homes, non-traditional mortgage arrangements like real estate contracts. We're trying to target those households that aren't necessarily protected by programs available to homeowners like forbearance and have access to those loss mitigation.
Is there anything else that we should discuss that we haven't touched on?
Goodness. You know, I work closely with a lot of local governments, and I sense an increasing concern for housing, which I hadn't seen before. And it seems like the issue is really being addressed at all levels of government, from considering how zoning impacts housing development and housing policy to considering ways local governments can actually create resources and financing for their own affordable housing projects. So it's a pretty exciting time, even though a lot of people are going through a lot of challenges, but I think it's kind of a turning point. People are really coming to terms with how essential housing is to just the whole ecosystem and the economy of New Mexico.
Suzan or Sarun, do either one of you want to add anything?
Thank you, Sonja. That was really good information, and I've been working closely with you, so I know the stats are so stark to us sometimes, but it's good to hear what comes out of our statistics and the programs that evolve because we're looking at the data and how important it is. And I'm just going to mention for our audience, if they're looking for how coronavirus has impacted this data, the Housing Pulse Survey that the U.S. Census Bureau has done puts out weekly stats on this.
Well, that about wraps it up for us here at Enchanting Economics in New Mexico. Don't forget to check us out at BBER, that's BBER.unm.edu, or on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn under @UNMBeaver. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care.